Happy to be here.
Okay, we have the recording started. Really happy that you joined us, Rod. I'm going to switch gears a little bit just so that we're able to record and let people in at the same time. I'm going to just briefly introduce everyone. I have bios for people, and I think since I'm doing double duty, I won't be able to read, and I don't have them memorized, and let people in at the same time. So I'm gonna just provide a very brief bio statement for each presenter. Vicki, did you turned it over? Oh, great. And the recording is, okay, great. If people could put themselves on mute. Michelle. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Hi, and I'm in presenter mode, so when you're ready to share screen with me, just feel comfortable, just feel free to do that.
Okay, terrific.
And if this doesn't work, no worries, because it was just basically something I can just wing it for just 2 minutes or so.
Okay, I think it'll work out. I might need someone to just briefly tell me how to remind me how to do screen share. Well, let me go ahead and briefly introduce everyone. We're very delighted and honored to have such an august panel speak about research and lived experience today. I want to welcome Dr. Jonathan Edwards, trailblazing leader in peer support, public health, and behavioral health policy, who brings passion and expertise to the table. Dr. Edwards brings over 30 years of personal recovery and professional expertise as a licensed clinical social worker, certified peer specialist, and public health consultant. Next, very honored to feature Dr. Howard Goldman, a distinguished expert in mental health policy and services with a legacy of impactful research and leadership. Dr. Goldman is professor of psychiatry at the University of Maryland School of Medicine and the principal investigator for the Maryland Behavioral Health Systems Improvement Collaborative. Very excited here to be joined by Dr. Nev Jones, a visionary researcher and advocate who brings powerful lived experience and expertise to the conversation on mental health reform. Dr. Jones is an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work with the faculty affiliation in psychiatry. Very thrilled to welcome Dr. Morgan Shields, an assistant professor at Washington University in St. Louis, and the director of the IDEAL Lab. IDEAL is inclusive, dignified, equitable, accountable, and loving. That is the IDEAL Lab. Dr. Shields' groundbreaking work focuses on improving the quality and accountability of behavioral healthcare services, particularly in patient psychiatry and crisis settings. Once again, the Roundtable warmly welcomes David Wertheimer as moderator today. David has worked in a variety of capacities in the nonprofit, government, educational, and philanthropic sectors for 4 decades. In May of 2019, he retired after almost 13 years at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he most recently served as the foundation's director of community and civic engagement. I'd like to today especially thank Vicki Goutsoulis from the College for Behavioral Health Leadership for technical support, and Jess Farias for graphic design of all the media that was used to advertise the Roundtable today. So with that, the final person to introduce is, we're thrilled to feature Ron McCullom, an award-winning journalist whose incredible article, "No Research About Us Without Us," deeply resonates with our vision for this event. His powerful exploration of lived experience in health research aligns perfectly with the Roundtable's focus on equitable behavioral health policy. Rod's expertise spans critical topics at the intersection of science, technology, and society, including artificial intelligence, trauma, and violence. His impactful journalism has appeared in Undark, The Atlantic, Nature, Scientific American, and MIT Technology Review, among others. Thank you so much, Rod, for being here today. And I'd like to turn the program over to you, and we can get started. Let's screen share. Okay. Are you available to access the? I think you're on mute, Rod. Yeah. Rod, you're on mute still. There you go.
Hi, thank you so much. I should be off now.
Is the sharing working?
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for the introduction, Lauren. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm delighted to kick things off. I need just a second to make sure the share function should be on now.
Yeah, sorry, and Laura, we're actually seeing your screen right now.
Right.
Okay, how would I share to Rod?
So you'll need to activate. So Rod, if you see the
There we
share button,
go.
you
He's
yeah,
requested.
perfect.
Great.
Okay. Okay.
And I see there's people in the waiting room. Let's see if I can get to them. I guess I can't let them in while the screen is being shared. Vicki?
Oh, you should be. It looks like it transferred over now.
Hi. Can I go now?
Yeah.
Are we ready?
I think so. Is it working?
I think so.
Okay,
Hi.
I'm not sure how to get to the waiting room though. I'm having trouble. I can see. Oh, there we go. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Hi. So my name is, should I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Hi.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction, Laura. My name is Rob McCullom. I am a Chicago-based science and technology writer. I am also the writer I'm the journalist behind the Harvard Public Health magazine article, No Research About Us Without Us. So I'm going to take just a moment or two just to explain who I am, how I came to doing this, and what some of the goals were in the article that hopefully people came away with. So I want to sort of start more or less where this began, and that little guy right there is me in about third or fourth grade. As you see, I have my Angela Davis afro, my Michael Jackson and Angela Davis afro. And at that time, I wanted to be a doctor or a scientist. I was really into science and into medicine. And I was really into the brain, learning as much as I could about the brain. Unfortunately, if you look at the photo just a little bit, I might look a little bit sad there. And that's around the time that I began to experience so horrific amount of abuse in my childhood and preteen years and teen years of bullying and just different types of abuse. And it sort of put me into a shell. And there's a whole bunch of long backstory in there, which I don't necessarily want to go into. But I came out of it having problems with focus, having problems with attention, having problems with memory, having problems with cognition. I think probably the psychologist on our panel or the psychiatrist would probably identify that as PTSD or anxiety or something along that path. But anyway, I wasn't able to be as successful as I wanted to be, at least as school is concerned. So I wasn't able to necessarily become a scientist or a doctor, but I became a journalist writing about those sorts of, writing about the sciences. I started writing for places like like The Atlantic, MIT Technology Review, writing for Nature, writing for Time and Undark. And one thing that I started to do some time ago was I was really interested in writing about crime, writing about trauma, writing about violence. I was trying to use my experiences just in terms of what was going on with me when I was younger and trying to learn more about that. So I worked on this piece for Undark and Time on how bullying might shape adolescent brains, for example, and how young developing minds just research around how young developing minds often were flooded with just different chemicals and their brains weren't able to develop in a healthy manner. So it's just something else I did. Start doing work for places like Dark around AI, and of course more on violence and how that affects people and how it affects young people. I've written a chapter in a book on science journalism on writing about science and crime and violence. And that was for a Tactical Guide to Science Journalism, which came out about 2 years ago, I think, from Oxford University Press. I've been writing on and off for Harvard Public Health magazine for about 2 years or so. And the editor-in-chief, Michael Fitzgerald, came to me about this time last year and said he had an idea on he wanted to write about community engaged research, but he was having some problems just trying to put everything together, in addition, to, he wanted to write the piece, of course, but he would also have to be the executive in charge of, the magazine. So he wanted to know, could I shepherd it? So I said, sure. I took his notes and we sort of worked on this hand in hand, just trying to develop a narrative for the piece. I had known a little bit about community engaged research, but I was using this as a time so I can learn more. I was able to share just a little bit from my, I'm not sure, can you read? But anyway, this is part of the nut graph, or the sort of main idea to walk away. And I actually see, might not have been the best share to read, sorry, just in terms of just the editing notes. But what we wanted to do, and here's just, we're just going to wrap up here. What we wanted to do was we wanted to talk a little bit about what was community engaged research and why was it important? Why was it, why did it deliver results, and why did other public health practitioners and advocates need to know more about it? We want to focus on community-based participatory research. One thing that was important to me and to Michael, our editor, was to try to emphasize how this was important, especially for communities that had been marginalized previously, communities that had been disrespected. Sometimes, scientists and researchers would drop in disadvantaged communities and use them for research, or use them, for grants, for example, and not come back and not involve them in the research. We wanted to discuss what some of the challenges were. And of course, some of the challenges, at least that I saw speaking with some people, were speaking with some researchers, were authenticity, accountability, defining what was your community-based participatory research, or defining what was community-engaged research. I was able to use 2 test cases. One was a community violence intervention leadership academy that was based at University of Chicago and was connecting with, I think, about 3 dozen community-based violence interventionists across the country. And the other was based in Puerto Rico on the island of Vieques, and this was environmental cleanup from the U.S. Navy Ordnance Service there. So I interviewed those researchers and we tried to find out what they were working on, why it was important, what was the community engaged angle. The Vieques research, the environmental cleanup research, was purely CBPR, whereas the gun violence prevention research was more community engaged as opposed to CBPR. I think we accomplished, I think we more or less accomplished much of what we tried to do. There was only a limited amount of time, and we couldn't, of course, talk to everyone. I think I had a good mix in terms of researchers and advocates. If I were to do anything differently, and this is something that Dr. Nev Jones actually had brought up in one of our pre-planning meetings, I definitely want to thank her for this. If I would have done anything differently, I would have tried to pivot more toward researchers with lived experience in this article. And I think that wasn't necessarily, I think there were some who had lived experience, but that wasn't necessarily one of the largest points in the article. I'm sorry, I didn't really go into that enough. So definitely I would like to work on that next time. And I think I'm glad to see that we're doing this panel now, and I'm glad to see that we see some attention. And if I can answer any other questions, I'm more than happy to. But I want to turn this over to the other panelists because there's so much to talk about. There's so many great, intelligent, and brilliant speakers who are lined up. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rod. We appreciate that overview. And hopefully we can drill down a little bit on the various points that you raised, especially sort of the qualities that are needed: accountability, authenticity. Really appreciate your observations there. David, would you like to pick up now, and we'll go into the others, connect with the other speakers and some of our questions that'll guide the dialogue.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And you know, given the times we're living in right now, I thought it'd be appropriate to start with something called the Chamberlain Curse, which is a quote from Joseph Chamberlain, who was a British politician in the late 19th and early 20th century, who said, "May we live in interesting times." And indeed we do. So the first question that we want to dive into that is really kind of takes off from where we started here with Rod is what does, for our panelists, what does no research about us without us mean to you? And what are the barriers and what are the benefits to no research about us without us? Who'd like to go first?
Sure, I can jump in. Quick sound check, a thumbs up to say that I can be heard. Good. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Laura, Vicky, Rod, David. My name is Jonathan Edwards, and I love this question in terms of what does no research without us mean? I think in particular of Judy Chamberlain, another Chamberlain. I thought you were about to speak on her. She wrote a book in the late 1970s on our own, patient-controlled alternatives to the mental health system. And there's a quote in there, and it says, just the ability to have some say in your own treatment is a key part of making that treatment work. And I would contend that similarly, research on people utilizing mental health services or any other services should not only include the perspectives of those individuals at the center of concern, but also allot them stake in the game. This is not without barriers. Several of the barriers that I'm going to mention are, the first would be funding that is contingent on traditional top-down quantitative design, unlike participatory action research, which advances the opposite model of participants holding equity in the conceptualization, design, conduct, analysis, and summary of research concerning themselves. And two, a lack of access to training in research methods. Yet the benefits of advancing no research without us, about us without us, could include collaboration between various stakeholders. For example, participants, clinicians, policymakers, interns, and community members working together. And hopefully, and Rod, you might have experienced this in your observations in your journalism, that this would potentially narrow the divide between perspectives. And something that Pat Corrigan, another one of my favorite researchers, refers to in one of his articles around 3 strategies for changing attributions about severe mental illness. And he hypothesizes that positive relationships between education, contact, and protest with stigma reduction. So that was just a sort of multifaceted way of answering that question. I certainly embrace a lot of these concepts for myself and in my own research. So thank you for the opportunity to answer that question.
Thanks, Jonathan. Other panelists?
I can jump in, I guess. Great to be here again. Thank you to Laura and David for hosting. I just wanted to say, sort of maybe to approach this in the sense of the nothing about us without us, the collective we being really important, and being really important because there is no single lived experience. There's a huge diversity of ways in which folks are impacted by psychiatric disabilities, mental health challenges, and then ways in which they interact with the mental health system and other systems that intersect the legal system, the disability benefit system, social welfare, et cetera. So one of the things about kind of participatory methods, participatory approaches to research is that they're really kind of thinking about a collective, diverse group of folks and how one kind of brings different perspectives to the table and still has the ability to kind of to move forward and make decisions in a project. So I want to kind of really highlight that. And then just when it comes to researchers with lived experience, I also just would like kind of highlight the collective vision, and the collective vision meaning that we are diversifying in a big way, so that not just one single researcher with lived experience you know, kind of has the opportunity to really kind of develop you know, a set of research goals, a research agenda, but you have a lot of different people coming from different kind of social positions and positionalities who are going to be collectively starting to ask, I think, really different questions and pursue research along those lines and have the resources and the means to do so. So brief response just to say we're kind of thinking about both things. How do we engage with communities, bring communities in, and do so in a way that really kind of centers and is very attentive to diversity? And then how do we think about diversifying the research workforce so that a group of folks with different ideas are going to inject that in across a whole host of different areas and in different ways.
Thanks, Nev. Morgan, Howard, any thoughts?
I'm happy to go now that you've been introduced to the people who bookend my 50-year experience in working with people with lived experience in my own research. I first heard that refrain of "nothing about us without us" when I first went to the National Institute of Mental Health in 1978. And I got involved in evaluating service delivery programs, and part of the research design was talking to stakeholders in the field in every city and every site. And that included people with lived experience who were working in service delivery roles. One of the people I met doing that was Laura Van Tosh. You already met her. Later, she and I collaborated on her idea to have a mental health policy roundtable, and it's really very rewarding to know that it's continuing today. And the other bookend is Nev herself. I just wanted to say a few things about this idea. I can't say that in my research, I always involve people with lived experience, not in every study. But when I went to the University of Maryland in Baltimore, I was setting up a mental health policy studies program, and I learned that Laura, who I'd met in the field in Philadelphia, was looking for work, and we hired her as one of the first people in our enterprise, and she worked as a policy analyst for us for a number of years, and then found other work doing advocacy. But we remained friends and colleagues for all those years through setting up the policy roundtable. As I said, I've been enriched by the experience of collaborating with people with lived experience, but it was not through any kind of slavish adherence to the principle, which I believe in. There weren't always opportunities, but I really jumped at the opportunity more recently when Nev Jones approached me about collaborating with her on a study of the trajectories of people in coordinated specialty care, people with first episode psychosis, and she approached me to collaborate with her. And it's been one of the more interesting collaborations of my time in the field. So I just can't say enough about the enrichment that talking to people from all kinds of different perspectives, whether they're service providers, policymakers, people with lived experience, their family members, the more people you talk to, the more you learn about the field. And I just thank them for the opportunity to have gotten to know them and to work with them. I'll throw it over to Morgan. I'm sure she has something she wants to say.
Great. Thank you, Laura, for organizing this and inviting me. And it's truly an honor to be in such impressive company. So I think for me, I'll just sort of make a logical argument for lived experience. I'm a bit of a logical person. I think about power when it comes to lived experience. And the first step of the research process is to make an observation. And depending on what your social position is, you're going to have different life experiences and different observations, different biases. And unfortunately, people with lived experience of mental health conditions or interacting with our service systems, especially criminal justice system, inpatient psychiatric facilities, et cetera, are not likely to make it through academia to a PhD level to become PIs. We're pretty underrepresented. I mean, I think things are changing, and Nev is a huge advocate for us and is really opening up doors. And honestly, we don't know how many people there are in the academy because a lot of us haven't felt comfortable being out and open. So that's a bit of an unknown, but I think just logically, it would make sense that there are a lot of barriers to make it to the level of being a PI. But the value that comes with, being someone who has lived experience is that you have certain insights that maybe that goes against the status quo. I mean, that's sort of the definition of being othered or stigmatized. And so it's really important to think about how we can create pathways for people with lived experience to make it to a leadership role, but also to think about how to integrate lived experience at various different stages of the research process. So leadership is important, but then also what are the methods? How are we interacting with community, et cetera? And, further to this point, I'll just say that psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, they all have professional organizations that advocate for their profession, their guild. Pharmaceutical companies, they lobby, hospitals lobby, the healthcare system. Consumers, people with lived experience, even though we're the ones who are most impacted by these services, do not have that same type of organized effort. And in fact, unfortunately, and I think things are changing, but unfortunately, our perceptions of reality tend to be discounted. So there's actually a weight against us, even though we're the ones most impacted, perhaps we should be centered. That's kind of what we're up against. And so that's what I see the value of lived experience is trying to adjust for this huge power imbalance in service delivery and in research. I mean, it takes multiple pathways. And, others mentioned a bunch of barriers, so I won't repeat what they said, but Nev mentioned this earlier, which is that we don't necessarily have a community in the same way as thinking about community engaged research with organizations. It's a really diverse network of people. And for me, I study inpatient psychiatric care, and I identify as being a survivor specifically. And so I think about people who actually may not be engaged in the delivery system at all, and might actually be really hard to connect with because they have a lot of distrust, rightfully so. And so distrust is a barrier in building that relationship. And then that's a value. Being out and open helps to build trust with folks. But it's hard because, I am still an academic and I am beholden also to my incentives and my pressures. And to that, I'll just say there has been a move towards community-based participatory methods, but they tend to be really framed around engaging with providers and organizations. And so from my perspective, someone who thinks about survivors who've been really hurt by providers, that for me has been challenging because I still see providers being centered even within these paradigms of participatory research methods. And so trying to make the case to funders and to, people who are evaluating me for tenure, that's a challenge.
Thanks, Morgan. So I'm curious now, as we move along here, for each of our panelists, how are you engaging people with lived experience in the projects that you're working on? And maybe each of you could take an example from your own work to say how you're engaging and utilizing the expertise and the wisdom of people with lived experience in your own research and practice.
I'll start from the top down. Nev just tells me what to do.
Excellent. Thanks, Howard.
Really, she conceived of the study.
Mm-hmm.
She enlisted some of us from the research community to help, and we're hoping to turn our findings about people's choices about work and school into policy changes when we're done with our study. We just hope we are given the opportunity to continue now in the second of 5 years of the project.
Outstanding. Thanks.
And I guess I can just go next. I'll just take a different example, which is our early psychosis intervention network hub in Maryland, Pennsylvania. Melanie Bennett at the University of Maryland is the PI, so shout out to Melanie. But we have a very integrated strategy across that hub. That includes a lived experience integration team. And so those are folks who are already employed across the hub, either as peer specialists, as trainees, as researchers, who across a sort of a complex multi-project kind of setup, review and inform all studies happening, whether that's quantitative data analysis, an intervention project being developed, a practice-based project that might be more, in a sense, kind of quality improvement oriented. We operate a lived experience collective that includes primarily young people who are directly enrolled in specialized early psychosis programs across our 2 states, across our hub. And then we proactively hire RAs and trainees with lived experience who then kind of populate and do a lot of the work across different projects with then sort of specific studies also in a more targeted way, consulting with those sort of most directly impacted by and relevant to the research. And to say just a tiny bit more about that, the theme of our hub is to look at disengagement in the context of early psychosis services. So for more targeted disengagement projects, we really want to understand and involve folks who have indeed actually disengaged from CSC services, rather than kind of people who are like, it's great, I'm very satisfied, this is getting me exactly what I need. We need to understand the perspectives of the people for whom the intervention is not working, is failing in some way, and really learn from that experience of folks for whom this has not worked, is not working, and then use that learning to really change things. So just another example from the Maryland, Pennsylvania team.
Thanks, Nev. You got a lot of hearts on that one. So well said. Other panelists on this question of sort of how you're engaging people in the projects you're working on.
I can go next. So I'm working on a project to develop a measure of trust in crisis mental health care services. And this is a quantitative measure that we're developing, but the process involves a lot of qualitative work. And so what I'll say first is I'm, as the PI of this project, have lived experience of crisis mental health care services, which I think is a pretty important foundation. And then my research team, most of the people in my research team have lived experience in different ways, lived experience with psychosis, suicidality, et cetera, different types of quote unquote crises, whatever language we use here. And then I created an advisory board that has been instrumental in providing feedback throughout the whole process. So they helped us develop our focus group questions, provided feedback on the items we developed, our conceptual model, and we'll continue to engage with them. But an important component of the advisory board is that most people on it have lived experience, because I'm thinking about the power. There are clinicians and people with policymaking experience, and they might have overlap with lived experience as well. But most of the advisory board has lived experience, which has been awesome, because then when we have meetings, people feel very comfortable speaking up. And then I also made sure to disclose my lived experience at the start so that everyone who didn't know me knew that I had this experience, which I think helps with building trust. And then it's an ongoing process. It's a relationship building and maintenance. Oh, and then then the other component is we did focus groups, 7 focus groups with people with lived experience. And that's a more traditional method of engaging people, gathering data. Yeah.
Excellent. Other panelists on this question?
Sure, I can go next. So I had the opportunity in doing my dissertation research about 6 years ago on job satisfaction of peer support staff working in mental health treatment and recovery-oriented service settings. And one of the things I was careful to do, even as a person with my own lived experience and wearing the multiple hats, was not to become that traditional quantitative researcher that was going to do a top-down analysis and othering. It was really important that I was reflexive, that I was transparent, even about my misconceptions. And so in order to ensure some of that, what I did was make sure that I piloted my instruments in the community. I had people to evaluate the survey to minimize burden, to look for language that could have been offensive or triggering. And also in wrapping things up, making sure that I would acknowledge the community first, because my sample was almost 700 peer support workers. And without them, without us, my research would not have been possible. So I also just want to say that Jack has put a comment in the chat that I really appreciate, that our research should always function at an applied level and not remain conceptual. And, you know, what I've been able to do, and, you know, fortunately, I had someone whose name many of you probably recognize, Phyllis Solomon, as one of my dissertation committee members, and there was no way that I was going to get through without, you know, applying the rigor that she mentored me in doing so. I've been able to, we've been able to publish a paper for my dissertation, and I've worked with another colleague, Dr. Amy Spagnuolo at Rutgers, in developing some infographics around what our findings were from the research, so that organizations can be better equipped to hire and not integrate, but to include peer support workers when we look at variables such as organizational support, supervision support, coworker support, and other things of that nature. So we've been able to kind of move that research from conceptual and findings to something that's applied and useful to the emerging workforce.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts from panelists?
Steve, you're on here, you know.
I turned it off.
No, but I mean, you're right here, Steve.
I think you need to put yourself on mute, Stephen. Yeah.
Put yourself.
Well, maybe now I'll turn it over then to Howard. You're going to kick off a discussion about policy implications of peer involvement in research activities as we move into a new administration.
I said, thanks for that easy question. I thought I would just add a comment about policy-related things that involving people with lived experience have taken advantage of. When we developed the Surgeon General's report on mental health all those years ago, we had a planning board. And so those of us who had editorial responsibility included people with lived experience on that planning board, helped us to design the structure of the report, the courses of action that followed from the report. We weren't allowed to have policy recommendations in this report, but some of the people with lived experience pressed us to at least have courses of action, which was our thinly veiled set of policy recommendations. In addition, Laura, if I'm not mistaken, was a contributor as an author part of the Surgeon General's report. There were several other people with lived experience who had disclosed that participated in writing the report. And then they were involved as reviewers, not only members of the planning board, but we went out into the community and had community activists and it immeasurably improved the product, both in terms of its scientific merit. It was much more comprehensive because of those contributions, but also because of its relevance to policy development subsequently. Later in the journal that had the privilege of editing, and Lisa Dixon now edits Psychiatric Services, I started by asking people with lived experience to serve occasionally as editorial consultants, and Lisa's gone and expanded that role quite dramatically, and Nev's been very involved in that. So I thought I would just mention some other ways in which the policy environment has been enriched by contributions of people who are both thoughtful, smart, involved in research, and have a background of lived experience in this field, so that truly we have a field that is pointing in the direction that recognizes that there should be nothing done, whether it's research, service delivery, without people who have been affected by treatment and affected by behavioral health conditions. I don't know whether the other panelists have something they'd like to add to these comments. I hadn't really worked out a clever, comprehensive answer to your question, David.
Well, you're rolling it. If you don't mind my saying, you're really rolling into question 3 and 4, which are perfect here. And this is really around the implications for statewide and national efforts, and really looking at what we're facing today, which is a different climate. Just in the last 48 hours or so, we're all becoming educated around the challenges of even just being a civil servant and having lived experience of surviving the changes that we're all facing. I'd like to turn this over to Nev and see if she'd like to add some things that might be in the works to help try to ensure that our voices don't vanish in the course of changes at the administration level. So would you like to bring that forward there, Nev?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think a place to start is to say, we over the last decade, but I would say in particular in the last 3 or 4 years in the US, we have actually made tremendous strides towards embracing both participatory methods and the role of people with psychiatric disabilities or mental health challenges in the research workforce and creating supports for them. NIMH has actually, in recent years, been a huge champion of various kinds of supports, both for participatory methods and for researchers with disabilities or other lived experience. And we now face a real existential threat in terms of the DEI rollback, DEIA, and really how this impacts all forms of proactively engaging with diverse communities, whether we're talking about communities or identities defined in terms of race, gender minority status, lived experience, disability, socioeconomic disadvantage. And so, as I think Laura was alluding to, we do have some efforts underway, and I'm gonna we put kind of a bunch of resources in just one Google slide deck. If people can't access this for any reason, I'm putting my email here too. But I just want to flag that a group of us have written an open letter. We're looking for additional signatories, trying to articulate some of the negative impacts on the entire kind of participatory mental health research enterprise. And we also have put together an FAQ for the mental health advocacy community for non-researchers who may not kind of understand or be fully aware of the ramifications of some of what is happening nationally in terms of its potential to really dismantle or roll back a lot of this progress that has been made in recent years, including ending of some of the major mechanisms for supporting students from underrepresented groups, including students with significant psychiatric disabilities, money that funded their degrees, that funded their training, and kind of giving them a leg up breaking into the research space, which is highly competitive and lots of barriers, as Morgan mentioned. So if you guys just try that link, I will leave it at that. There's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot that we could lose if we don't fight.
Thanks, Morgan. Thanks, Nev. Morgan, I see your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to add that I think what's important as we move forward is trying to find reasons to have hope. Because I mean, there's no denying that there's a lot of chaos going on, and a lot of hard work is sort of being undone. And anything I think that we can do to feel like the work that we have done and the work we're going to do has value, somehow it has value inherently, I think would be worth it. And as part of that, trying to resist the normalization, the changing in our culture that we're going to end up feeling. I already feel it in the institutions that I occupy, because I just, there's going to be less dedicated programs to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. People are going to feel less comfortable speaking up on certain issues. And what used to be sort of moderate is going to feel quite radical, I'm afraid. And that's going to be a challenge mentally, because we're all affected by our culture. We might like to believe that it all comes internally and that we can resist our culture, but we are affected by the currents. And so that I just view as a really important task that we all have, is to try to resist the normalization of bigotry, essentially.
Thank you.
Now, there's a question in chat about whether it's okay to disseminate widely the links that you've included. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're not quite sure the uses that we might put the open letter to. We'll try to get it out to any number of different people. But we also just didn't want there to be silence, right? No visibility of folks saying like that this affects lived experience integration in research too, which, we just had not seen like kind of visibly talked about anywhere yet. So it is a little bit of a niche area, but we thought it's just important that there's something out there. But please definitely share.
Great. And before we go into open questions from everybody who's participating today, Howard, any themes you want to identify as we wrap up the panel part and go into open question and answer?
I think my main takeaway is the endurance of this idea, even though it has never flowered in a tremendously beautiful way, the way we had imagined it. It still has staying power. And voices are important. People want to be heard and people want to speak. And I think that this whole idea about nothing about us without us will continue. And people need to be listened to. I don't have any other theme that I'd drawn, and I actually think it's nice that we have time to see if anybody in the audience has a question or two.
Yeah, let's go there now. So, Laura, why don't you and I do that together?
Sure. I think Carolyn Green, you had your hand up earlier. Do you want to ask a question, Carolyn?
So I have a couple of questions. So I do have lived experience. My lived experience was in Washington State, 300 court-ordered days, 50 days I spent being forced drugged, no legal counsel, no due process, quite life-changing. I'd like to know how we can come up with a group or a, probably my determination is having a federalized system, since if you're in Washington state, gravely disabled means this. If you're in California, gravely disabled means that. If you're in South Carolina, you don't have to be gravely disabled. You only have to be considered dangerous. The same in Minnesota and some other places, of how we can get together and come up with definitions as our basic foundation for terminology cohesiveness, if you will. So crisis means the same thing, or maybe has some things like that. But my suggestion, and this is kind of, so it's a question and a suggestion, because I'd like to know how we engage in legislative policy when we haven't really come to the table yet to define what our definitions are, really. There's still 50 states, we might have 50 different definitions. And so I think we should be able to come together somehow with having the same definitions in the same country, because they're constitutional violations. How do we go about doing that with coming together on that? Because it seems we keep coming back to the definitions. And what would be your non-negotiables in civil commitment, whether it's forced drugging, ECT, or things like that? What are your non-negotiables that you're not willing to negotiate on? I think definitions are totally negotiable, right? Because I might have something that you don't have, or you have something I don't have, that really makes the whole definition make sense for people. And the foundation that I would say that I have based this on is, this may sound a little unusual, is on driving. If you're in the United States of America, 55 miles an hour in Florida is 55 miles an hour in California. The stop signs, they're red and white. We have regulatory signs. We have our stop lights are green, yellow, and red. We don't have a variation of colors.
I understand. Why don't we see if one of the panelists would like to fill that? And I've got a couple of thoughts as well, but
perfect. Thank you.
Or Nev, or even Jonathan, I know that there's some national networks of peers, the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery. That's one vehicle. Another, and I can put their website in the chat. The other is SAMHSA has public comment and regulations where people can provide input into national definitions. Crisis care has been the latest, where people have been submitting their perspective on the role of peers in crisis services. And all of that is coming together with some federal changes to, and hopefully maybe funding sources as well as a result of that. Nev, did you want to add anything at this point around that? Or Jonathan even?
Well, there are protection and advocacy entities in the states.
Yes.
There are state and national disability rights organizations that do this work. There's the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Law that does this kind of work. So there already are resources in non-governmental organizations and government-related organizations that do exactly the kind of thing you've been talking about and asking for.
Right. And actually, one catch-all could be the Mental Health Liaison Group, which actually is inclusive of many of the organizations that Howard just mentioned. I can include their website as well.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you, Laura.
Sure.
And Laura, I put some in the chat. The National Council, I'm going to put the
great.
Bazelon Center in now.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, great.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, and there was a lot to that question. I mean, some of it is legal. It's,
It is.
Legal decentralization, and so states navigate, go through different amendment processes with their own mental health acts. So that is what accounts for, it's kind of a mess when you look at the degree of variation state by state in commitment criteria as well as implementation. I did want to say it's one of these areas where we need a lot more lived experience involvement on the research side. Morgan and I both work in this space, but for a very, very long time, when it comes to kind of civil commitment and assisted outpatient treatment, there has been just almost no visible involvement and leadership of folks who are directly impacted. So there is a big need, and I think I would encourage anybody out there who maybe isn't a researcher isn't active in the research space, to reach out to any of us who are, so that we can kind of find ways to, you know, kind of bring folks into the research space more, democratize, and really kind of think about some of these issues and how we can move forward agendas that matter to people who have been directly impacted.
Thank you, Nev.
Thank you, Nev.
Chantal Murty?
Yes. Hi. I had a question that is basically kind of about an argument I see often circulated in biomedical communities, which is about why a biomedical based consideration of psychiatric condition communities, which is that like why is there a singular push to have lived experience and participatory research in like conditions about mental health, but not so much for physical health? What is the distinction? I don't know if that is important to address on a philosophical level to fully like convince people who are just biomedically minded to kind of broaden their understanding and conceptualization of very difficult conditions like psychosis to treat, or if that's just kind of an interesting philosophical question that's not relevant. It is something I think about. I don't have a great answer to. One kind of exception I see in pain, in a physical condition research, is kind of pain, which is a very subjective phenomenon. Yet there is not a strong push we often see as strong as in mental health to have service user participation. Now again, I just thought I'd raise that because it's something I'm struggling to figure out how to answer myself.
Thanks. Ozair.
Yeah, so thank you for your time. My question is, I am a digital mental health startup founder with a lived experience for past 25 years. And my question is like the challenges surrounding founders with lived experience. I mean, I've been to many panels, talked to many people, but unfortunately, I mean, it's very hard to build a company without a lived experience, and it's even harder to do something with lived experience. And the resources, the advice that's normally given out is just standard cookie cutter advice. You reach out to people, you go to VCs, you do that, and which is, I mean, all people know that this is not easy for people who are already suffering. So, I mean, and given that they're the biggest stakeholder in the system. So, and also the ideas, I believe the biggest change in mental health is going to come from people like us. I mean, there's no better experience than going through multiple providers in multiple states, having seen the system failing them and the pain points that one go through. But the bandwidth and the yard of making that happen is very, very difficult. And as much as people talk about it and they can give me an access to a website, you go do this, but I mean, there is not much beyond that. So I feel like there is a lot of, so what do I do? I mean, how do I make it happen? Practical advice that that is doable with people who already have these conditions.
Thank you. Well, we're at time. So Laura, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for bearing with us. This was a kind of a complex topic, but we managed to get several really important perspectives here. I'm hoping maybe we can continue the dialogue as the news continues to shape some of our actions. I want to be in support of the peer researchers that we're so fortunate to have in the field, many more that exist beyond the few that we've been able to highlight today. I want to especially thank Rod McCullom for playing a role in this meeting, and really kind of by virtue of networking, really I think has been opened his eyes a little bit more to the behavioral health care factors dealing with nothing about us without us. So I'm really looking forward to continuing contact with you, Rod, and thank you so much. And I want to call out Howard Goldman, who is a rarity in this field when we've had so many years of stigma, even among psychiatrists and other policymakers and researchers. And Howard has set the stage and the model for being in collaboration with so many of us. so happy that he's working with Nev Jones.
So is he.
I know. And you just keep going with the two of you. And thank you so much, Morgan, for offering your perspective. Jonathan, I love you. We'll all be in touch again. And everyone, Happy New Year. And let's keep this dialogue going as quickly as we can keep it going. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, Doc said.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Laura, for organizing. It's great.
Absolutely. Be well.
Yeah.
Thank
You
you,
did a lot in an
Laura.
hour. Yeah.
Thank you so much, very much.
Take care, guys.